This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Where's the... So we're going to try something that we haven't ever done before. There's a remarkable teaching of Rabbi Pinchas Karatzer, who writes that while sitting on the floor on Tisha B'Av, one should take the hizdamnut, one should take the opportunity to pray for any of one's needs, be it in any particular area a person has a tzairach or a chesaron, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should be yimale mishaloisav l'toiva. We'll try to understand why exactly sitting on the floor on Tisha B'Av is this an eis ratzon, an opportune time to daven for one's needs. If you examine the first ois of Kinnot that we say Tisha B'Av morning, the first letter we say, and back to Kinnot Vav, is a samach. Samach. Kinnot begins with samach. So it doesn't, it begins with shin, shavas. No, it begins with samach. Why is that? Because Rabbi Elazar HaKaler composed the first Kinnot based on the 7 aleph bases of Eicha. Eicha has 5 prakim. Parak Aleph is the aleph base, Parak Beis is the aleph base, Parak Gimel is 3 aleph bases, Parak Dalet is the aleph base, and Parak Hey is random letters. But they're 22 psukim. So even though it's in a random order, the letter that should correspond to Samach is a Shin. So if you look in the first Kinnah, first you have a Shin that corresponds to the Samach if it would have been in order in Parak Hey, and the first 6-7 stanzas are all Samach. And Rabbi Pinchas Karatzer wants to know, why does Kinnot begin with the letter Samach? Furthermore, he wonders, we have a very strange practice. We have 3 weeks of mourning leading up to the 9 days. The 9 days is like Avelos, is like the week of Avelos. And then Tisha B'Av is like the Yom HaMisa. And then Tisha B'Av afternoon is when they literally set fire to the Beis HaMikdash. It should be the most intense form of mourning. And what do we do right when the Goyim are about to set fire to the Beis HaMikdash? We get off the ground and we sit on the bench. It's counterintuitive. The whole 3 weeks is leading up to the most intense mourning, and here it is when the Goyim are about to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, we book. We're out of here. We're ready to get up. And we say Psukim of Nechama. Says Rav Pinchas Karatzer, if you have a piece of pig, is there any way that one is permitted to eat a piece of pig? Yeah. If that piece of pig falls into your chicken soup, you could eat it. It's batal be samach shishim. It's batal be shishim. Says Rav Pinchas Karatzer. The Gemara Bracha says Ashrei is written by the order of the aleph beis. Aleph beis gimel daled hey. One letter doesn't appear. The letter nun. Malchuscha malchus kalamim shad v'chol davadar. Soimech Hashem l'cha neflim. Says the Gemara Brachos, David HaMelech did not want to allude to the nefila of Klal Yisrael. Nun is nefila. And even though he didn't want to allude to the nefila, he immediately supported it, Soimech Hashem l'chol neflim. So even though it doesn't say nefila, but David supported the fall that he didn't want to mention. Nun represents falling, Samach is the support. What is a miracle? A miracle is when a person's in a jam and has a nefila, a nun, and Hashem comes immediately with a Samach to support him. Nes, says Rabbi Pinchas Karatzer. What's a miracle? The nefila, the ultimate downfall, and the Rebbeinu Shalom comes immediately with the Samach. Samach is a support, the support of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why, what's the ultimate downfall? A Dvar Iser. It's nafal, it fell. But in a samach, in shishim, it's batal, and it rises again. Samach is the ultimate support. Says Rabbi Pinchas Karatzer, that's why, as soon as we say Eicha, and we talk about the downfall of Klal Yisrael, the first ois of the Kinnot is the ois samach. Hashem immediately supports us. That's why right after we get off the floor, we get up right away, because once we fall, Hashem comes to support us with the samach. And therefore, in the state of nefila, sitting on the floor is the most opportune time to be zoicha for the support of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that in the state of nefila, the Rebbeinu Shalom can come and support us immediately. Because just when the nun comes is when the samach supports us. Says Rabbi Pinchas Karatzer, being noifel ba'aretz, sitting on the floor, is an eis sign for one to be mispalel l'chol tzarcheim. But what should one daven for? Many years ago I heard the following story. So there's a little kid, and he's jumping on his parents' mattress back in the village, in an old village. He's jumping on this mattress of hay and grass and cotton, and he's jumping, and out of the mattress flies pictures of the Tsar. And the kid, he loves the Tsar, and he sees these pictures are floating in the air after he jumped on the mattress. They're just floating, and he sees the Tsar floating, and he's besimcha rabbah because he idolizes the Tsar. But then those pictures fly off, and they go into the candelabra, and they go up in smoke. And the child is crying that his pictures of the Tsar have been destroyed. Just then the mother comes in, and the mother sees these pictures that flew out from under the mattress have gone up in smoke. And the mother says, "Oh no, our life savings, all the money we put away for the last 50 years is going up in smoke. You know how hard we had to work to be able to save up this money, and now all of our money is going up in flames." And where was the father at the time? Father was off in the field. Father was plowing the field. And just then, the officer of the king calls out, "Does anybody have 500 ruble to lend me? I have an amazing once-in-a-lifetime offer. If anyone lends me 500 ruble, I will award them the biggest palace, the biggest forest in the region." And the father realizes he has 650 ruble stowed away under the mattress in the room. So he comes darting up to the room, and he runs in the room, and he sees his boy is crying, and his wife is crying, and he sees all his life's earnings up in smoke, and he too joins them in the crying. But he's not crying that the pictures of the Tsar are burning. He's not crying that his life savings has gone up in smoke. He is crying that the opportunity of a lifetime has been lost. He will not be able to lend money to the officer and be awarded this great forest. Says Harav Avigdor Miller, Zechasak Levracha, many people sit on the floor on Tisha B'Av and they cry and they mourn and they have sorrow and they sit ba'avelos. But there are many things to cry about. One could cry over their personal circumstance, their parnasa, their family, their personal situation. And that's also worthwhile to cry over, and it's an eis ratzon for that as well. A higher level is to cry for the state of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, b'chol makom shehem, are in a very precarious situation. Even in the United States of America, people always said, the United States of America will stand forever. No one will ever conquer the United States of America. Nobody ever conquered the Roman Empire either. The Roman Empire was never conquered. It imploded from within. There was disillusionment with the papal leaders, there was disillusionment with the government, and the society just crumbled from within, which is exactly what we see today. So, people could cry, we could cry for the state of Klal Yisrael. But says in Mesilas Yesharim, quoting Tana Dev Eliyahu, Kol Chacham mi Yisrael, shemisaneach al kvoidon shel Yisrael, v'al kvoidon shel hashchina, v'al shel Yisrael sheyigalu, v'sheyigadlu kvoid shamayim, zoicha l'ruach hakodesh b'dvarav. The highest madrega of mourning is not for one's personal circumstance, is not for even the persecution that Klal Yisrael endures, is to try to feel the tsar of the Shechina, and the kavod of the Shechina will only be magnified with the kavod of Klal Yisrael. The highest madrega of Avelos for Yerushalayim is to mourn for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to elevate the honor of Klal Yisrael, the honor of the Torah, and of course the honor of the Shechina. And maybe we'll take a few moments before we start the next Kinnot to take advantage of this eis ratzon, to be misabel on what we need to be mispalo for, be misabel on the state of Klal Yisrael, on the state of the Mikdash. We shall be zoicha sheyibane b'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Okay, this Kinnot begins the last group of the Kinnot service. The Kinnot service ends with a group of 10 Kinnos, 10 piyutim that are known as the Tzion Kinnos. All 10 Kinnos, with the exception of one, begin with the word Tzion, and they're concerned with the fact that Eretz Yisrael is the chosen land of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kinnot Lamed Vav was written by one of the greatest all-time Paitanim, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was the greatest in merit and distinction, says the Rashba and Tshuva Tafir Ches, of all the Paitanim. He was born in Toledo in 1080. He was a Talmud of the Rif, and then the Rimagash. And aside from studying Gemara, Yehuda Halevi became a master in literary style. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was in love with the land of Israel. He's the one who wrote the famous words, Libi ba'mizrach v'ani b'soif marav. That my heart is in the east while I am stranded in the farthest land of the west. There have been many pilgrims who traveled to Eretz Yisrael. Nobody expressed their love for Eretz Yisrael the way Rabbi Yehuda Halevi did. No Rishonim speak about Eretz Yisrael the way Rabbi Yehuda Halevi did. The Rambam in the Mar Nevuchim, he mentions Eretz Yisrael only once. Parak Yud Aleph Ois Chavtes. Rabbeinu Bachya does not mention Eretz Yisrael in the entire Chavis Havavos. However, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi expressed his passion in an entirely different way, in a poetic literary style. If you look on page 328, Miyasali kinafayim va'archik nedoid. Who shall make me wings so that I might wander far away? Onid levisrei levavi. I would cause my shattered heart to wander, bein b'sayrayach, among your shattered ruins. Apel la'api alei artseich. I would cause my face to fall upon your land. Ve'ertze avonayich lema'oid. I would desire your stones very much. Va'achoynein es afarayach. And favor your dust. What does Rabbi Yehuda Halevi mean that he would like to grow wings and fly through Eretz Yisrael? What does that refer to? What does that mean? The Medrash tells us in Dvarim Rabbah, in this week's Parsha, Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu, go up to the mountain, look at Eretz Yisrael. You could see it, but you can't enter. So Moshe said, if I can't enter as a human being, let me enter as an animal, as a chaya who eats the grass. Hashem said, no, Rav Lach. Amar lefan of Ribbon Shalom ve'imlav, if you don't make me like an animal, Hanach oisi ba'olam hazeh ka'oif, make me like a bird, so at least I could fly through the land of Israel. So that we see that Moshe desired to enter Eretz Yisrael even as a bird. Ask Rav Moshe. The Gemara in Soita says that Moshe wanted to enter Eretz Yisrael. Why? To be Mekayim mitzvahs hatzluyos ba'aretz. So if he's a bird, he can't fulfill the mitzvahs hatzluyos ba'aretz. Says Rav Moshe, from here we see the great spiritual benefit just of being in the land of Israel. Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Apel la'ape alei artzech. I would fall on my face. Ve'ertze avonayich lema'oid. I would intensely cherish your stones. Every stone of the land of Eretz Yisrael is endowed with great kedusha and great holiness and great sanctity. As the Gemara says in Ksubas about Rabbi Abba, that he would kiss the stones of Akko. By the way, we mentioned the principle of Reb Tzadok HaKohen, that every Agada to Gemara is in a specific place for a specific reason. Which Masechta talks about Churban Beis HaMikdash? Masechta Gittin. Because when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, it's like we're divorced from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which Masechta talks about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Masechta Ksubas. That's our attachment to Eretz Yisrael. In this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu asks Hashem, Ebrana, please let me cross. It says the Paneach Raza, the word na is Gematria 51. Moshe said, I just want to go 51 amos into Eretz Yisrael. The Yarden was 50 amos wide. Just let me step 1 foot into Eretz Yisrael. What is so holy about the dirt of Eretz Yisrael? The dirt has Kedusha. Listen to this. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi continues on the fourth line, page 330. Af ki ba'amdi alei kivrois avoisai. When I stand by the graves of the patriarchs, va'ashtoimim alei chevroin mivchak v'royach, and I behold in wonderment the choicest burial spots in Chevron, har ha'avarim v'har ha'har, asher sham shnei oirim gedolim, ma'irayach u'ma'irayach. Mount Avarim, Mount Har, the resting place of Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is introducing the principle that what gives the dirt of Eretz Yisrael its kedusha is the fact that the graves of our ancestors are in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, in Nehemiah, when Nehemiah came before the king of Paras to request permission to go to Yerushalayim, the king asked, Nehemiah, you have something against me? Why are you so sullen? Why do you have this bad look on your face? And Nehemiah said, Madua lo yaru panai, why should I not be dejected? Asher ha'ir beis kivrois avoisai chareva, when the city of the place of my forefathers lies in ruin. In other words, Nehemiah is articulating the principle that what gives Eretz Yisrael its kedusha is the fact that Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov are buried there. So many tzaddikim are buried there. Most of the Nevi'im are buried in Eretz Yisrael. How many Gedolim, if you ever went to Har HaZeisim, hundreds of all-time great Gedolei Yisrael buried there. That endows the land, the earth of Eretz Yisrael with Kedusha. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi then pens perhaps his most stirring words. Chaye neshamois avir artzech. A breath of life for the soul is the air of your land. Breathing in the air of Eretz Yisrael invigorates the soul with life-giving properties. As the great Mekubal, Rabbi Avram Azulai, the great-grandfather of the Chidah, writes in the Sefer Chesed Avram, I was zocheh to be at his kever of the Chesed Avram in Chevron. He says, just as the body requires oxygen, the soul requires a delicate and fine spiritual air. That is the land of Israel. Therefore, says the Chesed Avram, the land of Eretz Yisrael is called Avira Da'ara. Avira, or Hashem, the light of God. The light of God is in the air. As we mentioned, the greatest contribution of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was the work of the Kuzari, where he talks about how the king of the Khazars taunted him, saying, you Jews, you always yearn for Zion, you always daven for Tzion, but you don't really mean it. So the author of the Kuzari took his own words to heart, and he set out to the land that his heart yearned for. Upon reaching Damascus, facing Yerushalayim, there is evidence Rabbi Yehuda Halevi recited this Kinnot. And when the Kloisenberger Rebbe was liberated, and he was coming to America, and the Hasidim say, what about Eretz Yisrael? He said, I'm going to Eretz Yisrael via America. And ultimately, when the Kloisenberger Rebbe was flying toward Eretz Yisrael, he recited this Kinnot as he was headed toward the Holy Land. Well, many historians believe Rabbi Yehuda Halevi only got as far as Egypt and never even reached Damascus. However, there's a tradition in the Shalshelas HaKabbalah of Gedalia ibn Yachya, that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi reached Yerushalayim, where he fell on the ground, embraced the dust, and as he was kissing the dust, he was trampled and killed by an Arab horseman. So I was looking in one of the Sfarim that delineate where different Gedolim are buried, and I discovered that there is a very strong opinion that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is buried in the north of Eretz Yisrael. And as I love going to the north of Eretz Yisrael, I started making inquiries. How can I go to the kever of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi? So I asked around, and they said, you can't. It's in an Arab village. I said, but it says in the Sefer that some people went there. They said, yeah, but we don't know if they ever came back. So I asked around, how can I go to the city of Kabul? Now, Kabul already sounds like it's in Afghanistan, which pretty much it was. It was in an Arab village in the north of Eretz Yisrael. And I spoke to my friend Ephraim Schwartz, who now has an article in the Yated every week or every other week about, and he said he happens to know someone in his town, which is Carmiel, who works together with the Arab police force in the city of Kabul, and he could get me escort. So I figured, okay, let's go for it. So, 2 summers, a year and a half ago, January, we went to the city of Kabul, and I won't do this ordinarily. Check it out on TorahAnytime.com. We had Arab escort, we had Israeli police escort, and in the city of Kabul, which is a completely Arab city, there's not one Jew who lives in the entire city. We went to the kever of, who's buried there? The Ibn Ezra, Shlomo Ibn Gabriel, and the Navi Micha, and Rabbi Huda Halevi were buried there. We were zocha to daven at his kever. And if you can't, I don't know if we're going to go again, but you could see it. Great clip on it. Anyway, this was Rabbi Huda Halevi, the great Oyev Tzion Haloi Sishali L'Shloim Asirayach. Kinnot Lamed Vav. Tzion Haloi Sishali. Kinnot Lamed Ches, which will be the last Kinnot that we'll be explaining. Tzion Ateres Tzvi Simchas Hamoinayach. The Gemara Masechta Tainis on the Aflaman of Days makes an astounding statement. Says the Gemara, Kol HaMesabel Yushalayim Zoicha V'roya B'Shuasa. Anyone who mourns over Jerusalem will merit to see its salvation. Hafla v'fela, how can we say such a thing? There have been many, many tzaddikim, great people, who mourned and yearned for Yerushalayim in the most heartbreaking way, b'leivu v'nefesh, and unfortunately they were not zoicha to see the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. Says the Ritva, Rabbeinu Yom Tov ben Rabbi Avram Ashevili. We all know in the end of days there will be a period of Tchias HaMeisim. Says the Ritva, what we see from this Gemara is that aside from the regular Tchias HaMeisim that will be after the Yemais HaMashiach. In other words, first comes the Yemais HaMashiach, then the Yemais Tchias HaMeisim Be'acharis Hayamim. Says the Ritva, there will be a second Tchias HaMeisim that will take place before Mashiach comes. VIP Tchias HaMeisim. Not for everyone. VIP Tchias HaMeisim will be for those who were Misabel over Yerushalayim. Kol HaMisabel al Yerushalayim, says the Ritva, Zoiche V'roya B'Shuasa, take it to the bank. It doesn't mean necessarily in their lifetime, but before Mashiach comes, those who are Misabel will have Tchias HaMeisim. Says Reb Shlomo Brevda, this Yisoid of the Ritva is enunciated on the 7th line in this Kinnah. Shoichnei Kevarim Mechakim Umetzapim Liyom Yishech. Those who reside in their kever await and yearn the day of your salvation. V'az yitzmechu yichyu yeshenayach. Even those interred in their graves wait and hope for the day of your salvation. The Mekainen is enunciating the idea of the Ritva. The composer of Kinnot Lamed Ches, Rebbe Lezer, the son of Rav Moshe Hadarshan. Who's Rav Moshe Hadarshan? Rav Moshe Hadarshan was the Rebbe of Rashi. Rebbe Lezer lived in Würzburg, Germany in the beginning of the 13th century. And he too, like Rabbi Huda Halevi, expresses his yearning and longing for Tzion. When we talk about the importance of longing and yearning for the Geula, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Siddur. Rabbi Yaakov Emden, of course, the Chassam Sofer has dubbed as a Navi. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Ilmale lo haya ela avain ze biyadenu. If this would be our only sin, she'in misablim al Yerushalayim karoi, that we do not mourn for Jerusalem properly, kedai laharich galusenu, that would be enough of a reason to lengthen our galus. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, v'hi be'enai hasiba hakroiva hayoyser gluya atzuma v'chazaka. That in my eyes, this is the strongest reason, the most compelling reason. L'chal hashmadais, hamuflagais, hanoirais, asher matzanu begalos. Why do the Jewish people suffer in Galus so much? Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Shaloi hisabalnu al Yerushalayim karoi. V'loi osa al libenu, al kein kameis milev nishkachnu, we forget about it like a mess. V'chal oihev emes, yoidu lidvarenu. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, even on Tisha B'Av, mi v'mi ha-mesabel v'nenach al churban habayis karoi mimamake halev. Who really mourns from the depths of the heart? Kama demois nishbachos al zois. How many tears do we shed even on Tisha B'Av? Ve'ein tzarich loimer b'shar yemos hashana. One last thought, page 342. 4 lines from the end. Kida v'kaneh v'chal rashe b'samim ade ir hatimarim b'voyreach samanayach. The scent of the kida and kaneh and other choicest spices wafted ade ir timarim. Where's ir timarim? The city of Jericho. Bevoy ruach semanayach, where the fragrance of your spices reached. Af halavim asher shoymrim sharim. The sound of the opening of the gates of Levium was also heard in Yerichai. V'gam hameshoyrim shir bepeh im kol renanoyach. The voices of the Levium also were heard in Yerichai. You could smell the besamim to Yerichai. You could hear the closing of the gates to Yerichai. You could hear the Levium sing to Yerichai. What is this phenomenon? This phenomenon is recorded in the Mishnah, Masechta Tamid, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Ches. The Mishnah says 10 activities that took place in Jerusalem were heard, smelled, or sensed in Yerichai. Says the Mishnah, not only could you smell the Tiferes, when they blew the shofar in Yerushalayim, you could hear it in Yerichai. Yeshoymer maf koilo shel koyin gadol b'shah shu maskir es Hashem, you could hear it in Yerichai. Says the Ravid in his commentary to the Mishnah, was it that you could sense these phenomenon in that perimeter around Yerushalayim, a distance of Yerichai? Says the Ravid, no, only in Yerichai you could smell the Tiferes, only in Yerichai you could hear the shofar, only in Yerichai could you hear the Kohen Gadol mention the name of Hashem. Says the Ravid, it was Ma'isa Nisim. Why? She Yerichai haisa k'moy Yerushalayim. Jericho is like Jerusalem. Why? Says the Ravid, what was the first city that Yeshua conquered? Yerichai. And therefore Yerichai is like the Truma of Eretz Yisrael, and it has Kedusha like Yerushalayim. And therefore, Hashem made a miracle that the events of Yerushalayim are sensed in Yerichai, so that people will be margish the Kedusha of Yerushalayim in Yerichai. In fact, in the Shas Tshuva Zichron Yosef, he says if you look in the Sifri, it brings that when they were distributing Eretz Yisrael, I was just at his kever in Mad in Hungary, Shas Tshuva Zichron Yosef. He says that if you look in the Tosefta, they made a deal that Yerushalayim was Nischalik the Shvatim. Yerushalayim was divided among the Shvatim. So whichever Shevet would give up of Yerushalayim to build the Beis Hamikdash would get a compensation area of 500 amos by 500 amos in Yerichai, in the choicest part of Yerichai. Why is Yerichai compensation for Yerushalayim? Because Kedushas Yerichai is on par with Kedushas Yerushalayim. Says Shal Shetshuva Zichron Yosef, according to the Ravid, we understand that the Kedusha of Yerichai is similar to Kedusha of Yerushalayim, and hence these phenomenon were detected all the way to Yerichai. Comes Shal Shetshuva's Tzitz Eliezer and Chelek Yud. Chelek Yud, the Tzitz Eliezer wrote in 67, dealing with all the issues that came up. He said, isn't it absolutely haunting that during the 6-day war, simultaneously with the news report that they reconquered Yerushalayim and took control of Yer Kodshenu, at the same split second, the report came out that they reconquered and took control of the city of Yerichai. And therefore says at Tzitz Eliezer, something that of course nobody paid attention to, just like we would never consider giving away Yerushalayim, Yefei Noif Mesois Kala Aretz, we can never allow the city of Yerichai to slip out of our control. Kinnot, Lamed Ches Tzion Atar Tzvi,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.